All right. Welcome, everyone. Let's see. Okay, good. We've got some people coming in already.
Hooray.
It's always nice.
We did it.
So welcome to the Hudson Valley YA Society Horror Panel. I'm Frederick Rossero. I work at Oblong Books in Millerton. Our other store is in Rhinebeck, and I'm really excited to be here because I love horror and all of these horror authors are amazing. So let's see. We're gonna do introductions. First, I'm gonna say your names and you just give a wave so everybody knows who's who. I'll just go by who's on my screen. Sara Farizan with Dead Flip. We've got Tori Bovalino with The Gathering Dark, and her story in it is Loved by All Save One, and she edited it as well. Then there's Aden Polydoros, and he wrote It Stays With You in The Gathering Dark. Catriona Ward with Little Eve. Alison Ames with It Looks Like Us. And Lamar Giles with The Getaway. Alrighty, so I'm just gonna have you introduce yourselves, say a little bit about your book, and let's say, what's your favorite horror trope as you introduce yourselves? So let's start with Sara.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Sara Farizan. I'm the author of Dead Flip, which is an 80s, 90s horror comedy of my dreams. It's for ages 12 and up. I'm dressed tonight as Michael J. Fox from Teen Wolf before he fully wolfs out. So you'll notice I have the jacket.
Oh my God, in the hands.
Yes.
That's amazing.
So I did my best. Just for you, Hudson Valley. Thanks so much.
So much.
Anyway, Dead Flip is about three childhood best friends who in 1987, one of them goes missing, Sam. And the other two are seniors in high school and they become estranged, but they reunite when Sam comes back after having been missing for 5 years, except these two are seniors at their respective high schools and Sam is still 12 years old. So they reconnect, trying to figure out why Sam is back, how to help him, and why really strange and unsettling things are happening in the town now that Sam is back. And Sam is not quite himself, and it all has to do with a pinball machine that may or may not be eating people. It's a lot of laughs, I promise, and a lot of fun nostalgia, and it's about literally outgrowing a friendship. I hope you check it out this Halloween or any time of year, Arbor Day, Valentine's Day, whenever you feel equipped. And it's for ages 12 and up, and I had a lot of fun writing it. And my favorite horror trope is, well, I like horror comedies, obviously. So I like Gremlins, Teen Wolf, Monster Squad, things that are not so scary, but scary. And I really like a trope of eating something and then changing. So like The Stuff from 1985, which is about this goo that they just mass market and people eat it and then weird things happen. So
amazing. Yeah, I think horror and comedy go so well together. Both kind of build you up and then give you some kind of release, whether it's laughter or fear. So
they're a lot about timing. You have to set up the joke, you have to set up the scare. It's a lot about making sure that you elicit emotion, and they're two sides of the same coin, like making sure that release happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Tori.
Hello, I'm Tori Bovalino. I'm the author of The Devil Makes Three, Not Good for Maidens, and I edited the Gathering Dark collection and contributed. So my story in The Gathering Dark is about a hometown ghost of mine and a home invasion gone wrong, if a home invasion could go right. And just real quick, I think my favorite horror trope is probably like misleading ghosts. Or one of my favorites. I just like ghosts when they're kind of like not representing what you think they should be representing.
Great. I'm a sucker for ghosts always. I should have said, but my favorite horror trope is like something messed up in the woods, which you would think, because I live back in the woods, would be like my least favorite. But there's just something about walking through the woods in the dark at night and hearing something cracking behind you that gets me every time. All right, let's go with Aden now.
Hi, yeah, my name's Aden Polydoros. I'm the author of The City Beautiful, Bone Weaver, and my short story, It Stays With You, was published in the Gathering Dark anthology. And yeah, the short story in the short story anthology, it's Bloody Mary retellings in a sense, and it's about these three teens who are childhood friends, and each struggling with traumatic incidents in their own pasts that have sort of lingered throughout the years or are still active, and sort of when they play a game of Bloody Mary after like an alcohol-fueled party, they unintentionally end up summoning her, and as the story progresses, we learn that she takes on elements of the teens' own traumas, and that they need to find a way to stop her before she takes them that one by one. And I guess for me, one of my favorite tropes, I would have to say, would probably be the horror trope of like returning back to your origins and ancestral legacies. I like the idea of the past reasserting itself into the present and the way it does that.
Yeah, that's great. Historical horror is so much fun, and the blend between past and present is a good one. All right, Catriona.
Hi. Yes, so I'm Catriona Ward, and this is Little Eve, which oddly enough was my actually my second novel, but thanks to grace of the good people at Tor Nightfire, is now being released as my fifth novel, which is wonderful. It's quite emotional actually, going back to it. It's about, this is my elevator pitch, it's about a young woman who may or may not have killed her entire family in a snake worshipping cult in some standing stones on New Year's Eve on a Scottish island in 1920. A comedy, obviously. But it's very much like, you know, as a lot of horror and Gothic is fixed and rooted in the spirit of place. And my mother was born in Scotland and lived there for 3 years before she moved to Zimbabwe and grew up there. But yet when she has a wee dram of whiskey, she still talks in this Scottish accent with this longing for her home. And that really made its way into the book. And my favorite horror trope is discovering that the horror is not the horror at all, and that actually the seeming monster is not the thing you should have been worried about all along.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. Flipping expectations is, and you did that so well in The Last House on Needless Street as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Shirley Jackson does it a lot, doesn't she? Like in Hill House, we're never quite sure that actually Eleanor's fate as an older woman isn't the worst thing that could happen to her, much worse than being absorbed into the monstrous demonic house.
Okay, Alison.
Oh, what an act to follow. I'm Alison Ames. I wrote To Break a Covenant, and then most recently It Looks Like Us, which looks like this, which is about a group of teens who sign up for a research internship with a big tech company to go to Antarctica and collect samples of the ice to see if microplastic pollution has made it all the way to Antarctica. And the main character, Riley, has really, really bad anxiety, which I do also. And so she kind of feels that things aren't right and she's freaked out, but she's sort of telling herself, you know, that's your own brain, like just be cool and be on the trip. And by the time they realize that something is wrong, it is a little bit too late. There is a monster. It does take the shapes of the people that are there, hence title. And so it's sort of like internal mental illness demons and then also external actual monster demons And Riley sort of has to emerge through that as our final girl. So that's the very brief pitch for that. I have many favorite horror tropes. I love a haunted house. I love a stumbling upon a scene in which everyone has died. So like we've gone into a house and everyone in the house is dead. We've gone into a ship and everyone on the ship is dead. Like that kind of mystery and working backwards. And then a thing that I love but also hate extremely is, it's more of a movie thing, but like when you think there's nothing there and then all of a sudden you're able to see like the very slight outline of something that is there, is just my deepest nightmare. So that's one of my favorites.
It's amazing. I think it's so funny how we love the things we hate so much. The things that scare us the most are like closest to our hearts.
Yeah.
Okay, and Lamar.
Yeah, I'm Lamar Giles, and I wrote The Getaway, which is about a boy named Jay Butler whose family and friends all live and work at a luxury doomsday hideout disguised as a vacation resort. And when the world as we know it actually ends, the cruel billionaires who built the place come to hide out, and they expect service with a smile or else. And as far as my tropes, I love me some cursed artifacts. Bring me a monkey's paw, a puzzle box, somebody's old rusty locket. I can't get enough of stuff like that that has this super dark history and all these consequences that come with it.
Oh yeah, that's so much fun. Like a cursed mirror. Love it, love it. All right, so we're gonna jump into our questions. My first question is, what drew you to the horror genre in the first place? What is it about horror that's important to you? And anybody can jump in, or I can call on you if.
Can I
Yeah.
go? Yeah, so for me, I just always found comfort in horror. I'm a very anxious person. Probably since childhood, I didn't really know what anxiety was, but I always just feared the worst. And I love to read and watch horror because you could see people dealing with the worst case scenarios. In many cases, not always, they could defeat whatever that horrible thing was. And so for me, it always felt like releasing a pressure valve. And I can't say that everyone processes that way, but that's why it's important to me and why it's important for me to write what I write now, because I'm writing about my own anxiety still.
Yeah, horror is so cathartic, I feel. Anybody else? Let's see.
I feel exactly
Can
the
I-
same way.
Let's go with Aden.
Oh, Alison can go first. It's fine.
Okay, sure, Alison.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I do think most of the horror people I know are at our core kind of anxiety people also. And there's an element of, like Lamar said, just kind of expecting the worst and fearing the worst and thinking about the worst constantly, and being able to sort of go through like mirror neuron style with somebody who is experiencing the worst and then not having it break them is, I think, helpful to us trying to build up some kind of, like, it makes me feel more resilient in a way. I'm like, maybe if there was a monster, I could do something, you know. These random teens did it, so perhaps I could also. But yeah, I fully agree. I think it's just a way to sort of let your own brain demons out a little bit.
You read to find yourself, don't you? And there's that amazing empathetic act that happens between the reader and the writer, where you're sharing. And with horror, it's particularly profound, I think, because you're asking people to share things that aren't particularly comfortable. Fear is quite a shameful thing to feel. You know, it's humiliating, it's embarrassing. We're not meant to feel it as grown-ups. So like the writer holding out their hand to the reader and meeting in this great sort of nexus of, you know, because obviously writer and reader create the book between them. The book is just an object until someone reads it. And that great exercise in empathy is what makes horror so powerful, because you're showing your softest, whitest belly, really. Depends how many bellies you have, obviously. But but I just think horror has got an almost sacred function, you know, it's where we meet and draw from the deepest and
I was just gonna say, so I just came back from the Highlights Foundation's Jewish Symposium, where I did a keynote discussion speech on horror as a genre and the way I used it to discuss both Jewish history, but also my speech there went into fear and into how my own childhood experiences. You have fears in childhood, you have traumas in childhood. I spoke a lot about like family dysfunction, and you can't always fight those things as kids. You don't have the same autonomy as an adult. So as a child and as a teen, particularly as a teen, I used fear as a genre as a way of regaining the own autonomy I lacked in those times. And also the horror as a way of approaching difficult, approaching difficult topics, approaching situations of danger, of isolation, of confinement. You're able to explore those things at a distance. And I think for me, horror has always been a way to put into words the feelings I was going through, in a sense, gain some relief, some comfort from knowing, as someone else mentioned, you can defeat with horror, you can defeat the monster. With horror, there's perimeters. And with horror, you can really play with who's the hero and with what you want to say and what you want to talk about. So it's both a reader and a writer. Horror has always, for me, been a deeply cathartic genre, and something that I think is extremely useful to discuss stuff like social, like mental illness, like trauma, and like the legacies of those.
Yeah, I think horror is sometimes a safe place to work through those things. It's something that if you need to, you can put it down. You can press pause, you can put the book down, and you can take a little while to process.
Yeah,
I'll just happen.
And particularly my discussion went into the topic of consent and the way that horror books in particular, provide more consent than media, than movies,
and film.
Or film, or video games, which are,
This is true. Because you're both creating it together. You're consenting to be part of the experience as a reader. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we definitely use our imaginations, and that makes books a lot more personal, I think. I was thinking, as I was reading Alison's book, that it was very cinematic. It was very much, John Carpenter's The Thing, but at the same time, it was so much scarier, like personally experiencing it. Though I wasn't one of the characters, I felt like, oh my God, this is happening.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you.
Yeah, I would also say that horror kind of draws off of how we need to be taught to fear very young. So I think like thinking back when we were kids, like most of us were introduced to fairy tales and, stories that were passed down from word of mouth from a very young age. And in a lot of cases, those stories did contain warnings, and fear was actively involved in that. And I just think that horror holds this amazing place, that it is so representative of things in the real world, but through like lessons that, we might not necessarily need to learn in our everyday lives. Just thinking about that through folklore specifically, it's always very interesting to see kind of the representations of what we should be afraid of as it's being told through the story.
Yeah, I think some of the oldest stories have been horror stories, campfire stories that you tell with a message or something that you're trying to impart. And I think it really lets us explore ourselves.
As Lamar was saying,
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it's also just a lot of fun. Like, you think about some of the stuff that's done in books and stories, and you know, like one of my favorite Stephen King books is Christine, which I feel could be young adult, even though it's an adult novel, but the main characters are teenagers, and it's about a car that, you know, is not really all that pleasant. Don't want to spoil it for anyone. It's from 1983, so, you know, but which inspired, you know, a pinball machine that may or may not eat people. So yeah, it's just fun to just play. And horror, you know, you can say a lot more without having to say it directly. Like you're sneaking in the vegetables a lot of the time with your messaging, like you know, the adventure is happening or the horrifying scary thing is happening, but really it's like, I don't know, I think about like Stepford Wives, right, where like people are anxious about the women's movement and what does that mean, and then you have this movie that's like, oh my god, they want to take us back to a certain time. And then Get Out is heavily influenced by Stepford Wives, and it's talking about race and a lot of other things, but it has this scary thing. So I think it's a way to really talk about things that people are thinking about or that are top of mind, but you're able to do it in a story that's also engaging without being too preachy or, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the underlying messages and metaphors that you guys, not me, put into horror are just sometimes very sneaky. And I think that's important. You know, I think with horror, you have to experience empathy for the character or for whoever. And that kind of leads me into my next thing. I think horror is something that is often the outsiders are drawn to it. I think it's something that has always been for us, but now more and more it's being created by us and featuring us. And I was wondering if for you all, is that something that you feel? Is that something that's influenced your writing?
Just one about what Sara was saying. Oh, sorry. Go.
No, you go.
No, please. I beg you, Alison.
I was just going to say, when Aden said you get to decide who's going to be the hero, that like hit me in a soul place that I wasn't totally prepared for. But I think that that's so much of it is just like the unconventional, you know, the person who is going to survive the horror or be the star of the horror is not necessarily the person that everybody loves or wants to hang out with or respects or any other number of things. It can be any person. And so you can do a self-insert, and you can do, you know, somebody who's kind of on the fringes in whatever way, and you can bring them into the center of something and then let them survive it.
Right. Yeah, it was particularly important for me in the short story in the Gathering Dark anthology is that the main, not to spoil anything, but I think it's more because I have comfort warnings as well, but the main character was molested as a child, and that plays into the, very much into the story. You don't typically see that in horror. It's considered a topic that a lot of people don't want to touch upon, and that is in some way considered, I think some people tend to not want to see that, but the alternative then is that you have a lot of media that, for example, Law and Order Special Victims Unit, you see it, you see an unrealistic expectation of justice in that show, but also it centers savior characters. It does not center the victims, and it is not focused on that. And I think that's one other reason I like horror, is that horror can be used to give a voice to people and characters who don't typically have that voice in fiction or in mainstream media.
Yeah, absolutely. Those taboo subjects are what we kind of revel in, and they give us a place to be seen and heard.
Also, those difficult feelings that you had, you know, there's a reason why, just going back to what Sara was saying about, you know, I don't know, young people's feeling, like, you know, the uncomfortable feelings it lets you deal with. When you're a teenager or when you're young and just discovering yourself, horror is like a revelation, because you had no idea that anybody else felt these unacceptable things, and wanted to read these unacceptable things. It really is. I always go back to this metaphor of like the holding of the hand out to the reader. And that hand is so crucial at a certain stage of your life and development, when you're just in the process of becoming. And I used to have these, they're called hypnagogic hallucinations. But I used to wake up when I was 13 with a hand in the small of my back pushing me out of bed. And I could feel every finger on the hand.
Wow.
And this is before Google. And it went, after the age of 13, it went everywhere I went. So it wasn't a place that was haunted, it was me. So to read horror, and particularly for me, Stephen King, there's lots of horror other than Stephen King. We know this, but for me, it was Stephen King. To read these experiences and have that emotional engagement and have that world of fear opened up to you, it really helped and made it a lot better. You know, the world is so strange when you're at that phase of life, that actually horror doesn't seem that much outside your real experience anyway, because everything's so strange. I think it is a cathartic and healing tool. I do.
Yeah, that speaks to what Lamar's book is about. I think fear can be, or horror can be, about fear of the unknown, but it can also very much be fear of the known. And what's known to some is not known to others. And we get to experience that through reading and open up our minds and our worlds.
Yeah. Question about being an outsider. I think it's a little complicated when you're a Black horror fan, particularly at the time when I was growing up, because while I agree the genre is a genre for outsiders, it often felt if you run across a Black character, they were an outsider in the outsider genre. If they're there at all. If they're there, it's typically to be a sidekick and cannon fodder. And even though I love the genre immensely growing up, that always bothered me, because if there's a single Black person in a horror story, whether that's written or filmed, and they die, it's like witnessing a genocide.
Yeah.
And that's something that informs my writing, because I'm just not going to do that. Spoiler alert. A lot of Black people are going to make it through my stories, even though we'll still have the scary moments. And that has informed my writing, because I always said, if I got a chance to do this, I would like to write the sort of stories where characters that look like me could be centered and play a hero role that I spoke about. Because even though I could relate to any hero in any situation, it is cool when the hero does resemble you and your family and your friends.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important, especially for young readers, to see that representation of people going through something that may be a little more extreme than what they know, but maybe not that much more extreme, and surviving it and coming out the other side.
There was a great series on Shudder called Horror Noir, which just talked about like Black cinema from a horror lens, like horror, and just, it was really interesting and fascinating. And it's nice to see, like Lamar was saying, like you're not just the first to die in a film, you get to like be the hero and do cool stuff. And I would argue that there's a lot of queer fans of horror, and I think that makes sense. And as we were saying earlier about anxiety, I also am an anxious person. So I think a lot of, and when you see horror become more and more popular, it's usually at a time when people are very, very anxious, right? So it's always popular, but like seeing, the beginning of 2020, like everyone's tuning into Contagion, or everyone's tuning into Outbreak. I think it's a way for people to, and reading a lot of more scary stuff. I think it speaks to a lot of, things that we're nervous about, but don't really want to think about, but we want to watch characters confront it. Like we ourselves might not be ready, right? We're not ready to come out, or we're not ready to, speak out or whatever, but you see a character do it in a, and also maybe like chop off a zombie's head. And then you feel kind of like, all right, well, that was
it is about justice as well, though. Like, as you're saying, it has the means and the scope to deal with all these really complicated and frightening things societally, politically, in terms of rights and justice. Just from what Lamar was saying, even just the act of inclusivity and centering of people who weren't centered before is a an act that horror can perform really powerfully. And I have this real hobby horse about it, because I feel like sometimes it gets less and less so, but it does get relegated to the lowest rung of the genre ladder. Like, everyone goes, oh, look, how lovely, fantasy, let's read that, that sounds nice. Or like science fiction sounds interesting, romance, yes please. And then you have horror, which asks you to deal with difficult, unpleasant things. And people, because of the element of fear and the shamefulness and the sort of resistance to that, resist the genre as a whole. And you have this maddening line in every review that you get about a literary, so-called literary writer turning their hand to horror, where the reviewer goes, they transcend the genre. And I'm like, wow, that's very patronizing. And because the genre itself is an incredibly powerful engine that tells really amazing truths about ourselves and our lives and all this stuff. I've gone on too long, but I know you're all on my team.
I really love your mention of connecting it to justice and the way that horror can be transformative, because I know even for me as a writer, this last year, from turning in the draft for that short story to working on a novel that deals with a lot of similar topics as my short story in The Gathering Dark, I know for me on a personal scale, the research I've done and the decisions I've made to write about what I decided to write about have been transformative. And I think that it can also, for many readers, be a way of processing and even eventually getting justice for wrongs in their own life. I know for me that my writing has made me decide to pursue that on my own as well.
Also, it's interesting. Sorry. No, go ahead, Tori.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that something really nice about the current horror boom is that the mess itself isn't necessarily 100% tied to identity as well. So you can be presented as an outsider, but that's not 100% representative of the thing that you're dealing with. So like with my recent novel, I got to kind of write about, queerness and how we process that. And that wasn't the focus of it, but it was nice to have that be something that it's not about, the horror is, navigating queerness. The horror is, navigating this body thing, and queerness is on the side. So it's nice that we can kind of refocus and have the mess be something gory and terrible and scary, and then the identity is there and present and doesn't have to be explained as an element of horror as well.
Yeah, and I think horror lets you, all genres can do this, but I think horror especially lets you see the outsider character as a full person, because you're empathizing with them, you're fearing what they fear. And I think that's one of the best ways to get close to a person, get close to a character, is to fear what they fear.
Well, also you're watching someone transform too. That happens in a lot of stories if the story did a good job, and but I think in horror especially, the transformation is so fast because you're dealing with whatever the big bad is or the monster is or the situation. So the pacing is really intense. Like there might be a slow build, but like once that shit hits the fan, pardon my French, it's go time. And so to see characters that you got to know and care about having to deal with something like that and then transform I think is really important, especially when young people are going through all kinds of changes, whether that's physical or emotional, or, I think it's, I don't know. And to Catriona's point about how horror gets like poo-pooed a lot of the time, I think it's because it's a lot of people who don't read it or don't want to read it or are scared to read it or are like, ugh, gross, like there's a lot of gross stuff in there, and there may or may not be, but it's one of the more popular genres because we're all afraid of things. Like I teach a seminar where I have adult writers who want to write like scary stuff for kids. I'm like, okay, write down, and you don't have to share with anyone. And you all listening can do this too if you want to write, scary stories, is write down all the things you are afraid of at the age in which your character is. So if you're writing for an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old, what have you, write down all the things, don't share with anyone, that you were scared of at that age. And you do 15 minutes of that. Then I say, okay, write down all the things that you're afraid of now, which usually has to do with like quarterly taxes or mortgage payment or other things, and do that for 15 minutes. But then I ask, okay, what's the overlap? And usually you can find a lot of the same things. Like, so I don't know, it's like a lot of our, we grow up and we face our fears and that sort of thing, but there's a lot that stays with us, and that's universal for a lot of different people of all different backgrounds.
Well said, yeah.
All right, so moving on to the next question. I'm gonna ask a fun one. Have you ever spooked yourself while writing a scary scene? Have you ever gotten just totally creeped out by what was coming out of your own head?
I actually made myself nauseous for the first time ever, like last week, I think. Yeah, it doesn't usually happen, but I don't know what it was, but I was writing pretty late at night, and it was, a scene where there's a body, and that happens a lot. Yeah, and I just got really like, oh, not sure where this is going. This is fine. But we'll see if it survives to the final draft.
I've definitely done it. There's a scene in The Getaway that made me queasy, and I had a hard time sleeping after I wrote it. I won't spoil it, but anyone who's read the book and got to the part called Splash Zone will know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely, yeah. That there's definitely a lot of tough things in The Getaway, but that was really one of them. And yeah, I can't imagine being able to write something like that. That must have been very emotionally affecting.
I know
Yeah,
for
that was tough. That was tough.
You probably had to go through it yourself to write it, Lamar. Like, so this, in a sense, happened to you.
Yeah, and it was a hard scene. So, and that's probably the worst I've ever felt writing something. So that's all I'll say about that. Like I said, I can't say too much without spoiling it, but it was a rough one.
I know for me, surprisingly not until I began working on another novel when I was dictating it late at night a year or two ago. And this isn't anyone that I've mentioned, but like it wasn't even a horror one, but I think because I was so caught up in talking and in the story in my head, began to get really nervous for like the protagonist in a way that I haven't before.
I love that. I think that's a goal that I have, because I haven't done it ever, which I think is because I am not like like I'm like, you clown. Like if I know that it came from me, I'm like, well, I'm sure this could be scarier. I'm sure there's ways that this could be scarier. So I kind of tend to like go through the roof with stuff, and then a friend of mine, when she read the new one, was like, I really love that your publisher just like really lets you be a freak. And I was like, thank you so much. I didn't intend to be that much of a freak, but like as I'm writing it, I'm like, well, you know, this is fine, but you could be. So I think I would like to scare myself at some point. I don't know if I have the level of like separation from myself that I guess I would need. Like I definitely freak myself out a lot just in like walking in the nighttime. So it's definitely possible. But if it's like something that I've created, I'm like, do better.
I scared myself with the amount of drafts I did. That was, you know,
That's
and
That's always
my editor being like,
terrifying.
can you make this look scary? You know, because right now all you have is like a bunch of flickering arcade games, and like I'm like more flickering, more lights switching on and off.
That's what I'm hearing.
So yeah, I'd like to. I also feel very like I'm a huge fan of the genre, but I feel like I have a lot to learn and a lot more to read and a lot more to, but I'm also very chicken. So it's something I'd like to keep doing. And I think maybe I'm more suited for middle grade than young adult horror. Because I want everybody.
What's the difference, just out of interest? What would you say is the?
I think young adult, you can, and I don't want to speak out of turn because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's some middle grade that's more graphic than YA, or that's dealing with maybe more heavier things. I feel like middle grade has a wide range and you can deal with heavy topics. They're just done in more subtle ways and not as explicit.
From what I've heard.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, one I've heard that does a really great job of tackling darker topics. I haven't read it, but it's on my list, is Disappearing House.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, I'm so excited to read it. I've had it mentioned to me so many times over the weekend.
So good. Yes, please. It is, yeah, it's very heavy, but it's unbelievable. It's so good.
I missed the title. What was it?
Disappearing House. I think we might even have the author in the audience.
Oh, she's dead, she says.
Allie.
Hi, Allie.
I was at a Jewish symposium, so I met her agent. So.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I think it's so important so many people will coddle children and young people and say, oh, they can't deal with this, they can't deal with that, they can't read that, I'm not comfortable with my kid reading that. But so many times we're just mirroring what they've already experienced, what they see in the world, and having that represented on the page, like we have already said, it's a way to process.
Yeah. And real life is so scary these days, you know, like we are living in, I mean, it's always a scary time, right? Like, I feel like it's always going to be scary for whoever's living different situations. But I think about young people and all the stuff they're going through, and that we didn't, you know, as young people, that it you know, I want to make sure kids have fun and have a good time reading it. But I'm also like, man, I don't think a pinball machine that eats people can compare to like a pandemic or a school shooting or climate change or any of these other things that are really anxiety inducing. So I think it's also providing an escape hatch in a lot of ways where, again, those anxieties we talked about, but you're reading something that's maybe a little goofier like Dead Flip, or that's maybe very scary, like any of your books, but it's dealing with other things that aren't on their top of mind, you know.
I frighten myself sometimes in retrospect. I always frighten myself when I'm writing a scene, but I'm just talking about using yourself, you know, and your experience, which of course you do, like you mine yourself so deeply for all of this, don't you? But and with Little Eve in particular, there was one thing that really freaked me out, which is, so I'm blind in this eye. And that's why I always look at people like this, like I'm flirting with them. Sometimes I am flirting with them, but you know, it's something that's just I was born with. And there's a scene of eye removal in the book, and the character is thereafter one-eyed. And my partner at the time said to me, like, I mean, don't you think this might be about you? And I was like, no, 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 don't be silly. And then later I was like, well, that does make a lot of sense. And it's just that thing of drawing up from your depths. You know, the well is very deep and you don't know what's in there really. And when you haul the bucket up, it's a kind of alchemy and magic that you perform, isn't it, on the page? And as well as having to deal with all those things that Sara was talking about with, you know, this ambient horror that surrounds us every day.
Okay, so I think we can move on to the part I'm really excited about, which is for you all to read a section of your story. If everybody's ready for that. We're gonna start with Aden, because
yeah, I was gonna say I have to leave in like 5 minutes, so I'm just going to read a very short excerpt later on in the short story. It does reference suicidal ideation and cancer, and I do not believe there's anything else in there in this particular excerpt, but of course I have a full list of content warnings on my website. 1 second. Okay, the earthly remains of Black Rapids Amusement Park rotted just off the I-75, a moss-choked warren of rusty roller coasters and water slides. It'd been closed 5 years now, and in that time, alligators and wild hogs had reclaimed the place. It wasn't what happened to me in the restroom that did Black Rapids in. Wasn't the recession or a salmonella outbreak that the horde of tourists in the hospital. Apparently, on one of the water slides, there'd been an open section before a corkscrew turn, and a 13-year-old had hit the slide's top just right. His head came clean off, rolled down with all the rest. That was a killing blow. The slide was gone now, but the demolition crew had done a half-assed job and left the stairs used to reach it, just going up to a platform that led nowhere. Rumor around town was on Halloween night, if you managed to sneak inside the park and not become gator food in the process, that slide would be there again, coiled like an entrail along Water Park's southern flank. And if you rode it down, it'd take you straight to hell. October was still months away, so I wasn't surprised when my flashlight beam skidded across the platform, but no slide. Rainwater filled the cement line pool the slide would have emptied into. As we passed, I eyed the reflections our lights made in the stagnant water, waiting for the glowing beams to unspool into a nest of blonde hair reaching hand, fingers like pale grubs. Instead, the black surface glistened undisturbed, clawed with algae and lily pads. My stomach knotted with tension, and each time I swallowed, it felt like there were loose teeth lodged in my throat. To keep my hands free, I clipped my old GI flashlight onto my jacket's breast pocket. It'd been a $3 thrift find, but its beam was stronger than any other light I'd got. I felt better with the crowbar in both hands. Are you sure it's even still here? Sara asked, flexing her fingers anxiously around her bat's handle. Yeah, it's here. I tore my gaze from the water, turned back ahead. Gabe kept at my side like a shadow, weaponless except for a flashlight of his own. Our hollow footsteps were accompanied by the hum of mosquitoes and the low scratch of animals creeping through the swampish overgrowth. The air was so heavy with the humidity of an approaching storm that the night actually seemed to have physical weight to it, like the sky was boring down on us. What I didn't tell Gabe or Sara was I'd been coming here ever since I got it in my mind to off myself. I didn't want to do the deed, but I wouldn't mind if an alligator stared me in a death row or some slapdash structure came crashing down on my head. And yeah, maybe deep down I thought one of these days I'd come across the guy, but he'd be waiting for me under the canopy of Spanish moss skirting the merry-go-round, or sitting with his stringy Levi's dangling in the brackish water, looking like no time had passed at all. He'd rise and come to me, offering me a fox's smile and sun-crinkled eyes. He'd hold out his hand and I would take it. Past the water park area, the amusement park welcomed us. A wooden roller coaster rising like a ribcage, the moss-timbered faces of the merry-go-rounds, horses, hot dog stands and cart rides left to rot. Gabe was panting so heavily he had to stop to take a rest, just sit for a moment or two on one of the benches to regain his breath. He pushed his bangs out of his eyes and slouched off an entire fistful of hair with it. He gazed down at the black lump, his mouth slack. I kept looking at my reflection in the water, he said, as if that explained it all, his dazed eyes slowly lifting to me. There were a couple dark specks on his lips, dirt or maybe blood. His face was even thinner, as if he dropped another 5 pounds in the drive over. I wanted to kiss him deep enough to reach his cancer and chew it out of him, starting with his lungs, then moving onto his lymph nodes. I'd swallow the tumors down a bloody goblet at a time because I fucking deserved it, and I hated myself, and I was just so tired. I was so tired of feeling this way. Marlowe, Sara whispered, sinking her nails into my arm. I followed her gaze across the midway to live oaks lying down the sidewalk like a funeral procession, their gnarled branches draped in mossy veils. A man in a shabby three-piece suit stepped out from the darkness. Salt and pepper hair oiled back his face. His face gleamed at us, perfectly blank and reflective, capturing our flashlight beams and turning them back on us, a mirror.
Incredible. The atmosphere, just amazing.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us right before your appointment.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. And I wish I could stay longer. Thank you everyone for coming. It was wonderful being here.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
So good. All right, let's just go to who's next on my screen. Let's do Sara.
Oh gosh, I can't follow that.
You can do it.
Gosh, okay, well, I'll read a little bit from Dead Flip, not too much. This book is from multiple POVs. So it's from Corey's POV. Corey is the closeted homecoming queen nominee. It's from Maz's point of view also, and he's like a himbo jock who drinks too much and misses his friend Sam, and Sam, who is the boy who goes missing. And I'm going to be reading a little bit from Halloween night of 1987, which is when Sam goes missing. He has already played the pinball machine, and after playing the machine has been having nightmares that only Maz knows about. And they're all 12 in 1987, and Sam really wants to go trick-or-treating before he moves to Florida. But his friends are sort of emotionally outgrowing him. And so this is their last kind of hoorah trick-or-treating. So I'll read a little bit from that.
Great.
Okay. And Potato Chip is Corey's dog. And Tiffany is Corey's older sister, who is a 80s stereotype, just terrible, mean girl type person. And I'm sorry, my voice, I have the same inflection in my voice. So I will try to do character changes, but it just stays this way. So you can never tell if I'm excited. You can never tell if I'm like, it's just this. So I'll do my best. But you look like you haven't slept in a week, Maz said, as we climbed the stairs to Corey's porch. I pulled my mask down over my face. Another nightmare? Was the old man there again? Your mom? No, they haven't shown up in a couple of days, I said. I pushed the doorbell and heard Potato Chip bark. Tiffany opened the door, holding a bowl of candy at her hip. She broke out in a fit of guffaws when she saw us. You've got to be kidding, Tiffany wheezed. Halloween's your time to shine, I said, my voice muffled behind my mask. You never have to dress up. You're already a monster. This didn't stop her from laughing at us. Maz wasn't any help. He just gaped at her like a chump. What are you even supposed to be? Tiffany asked, holding the bowl in both hands, her laughter dying down. Corey hadn't invited us to carve jack-o'-lanterns with her like we did every year, but there was one next to the door anyway. Isn't it obvious? I asked, holding my gloved hand in the air and pretending to use the dark side on her. You're RoboCop? Tiffany asked with a straight face. I'm Darth Vader, you airhead, I said. I knew she was teasing, but I wish she'd give it a rest. I was too tired for this. Oh yeah, from those movies. What was it called? Geek Battles, Nerd Combat. She bit her lower lip. I know, Star Trek. Is Corey ready? Maz asked. You're happy to walk around with Dork Vader, Maz? Tiffany asked, looking at him with sympathy. Maz hadn't really put much effort into his costume. He was wearing a black turtleneck and black pants for Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi. His lightsaber was a flashlight with a green bulb. He didn't even look like Luke. He looked like a singer in a new wave band with a flashlight. You don't have to let him boss you around just because he's your father. Aren't you supposed to do your job and give us candy? I said with a sneer, since you're home alone on a Saturday night and all. You have to say the magic words, Tiffany said. Suck. Trick or treat, Maz interrupted. Tiffany dropped 5 fun-sized candy bars into his pillowcase. Then she picked out only one Tootsie Roll and plopped it in my bag. And I'll stop there, but this is the night in which Sam goes missing. So, you know, scary stuff.
Yeah, the real horror, a mean teenage girl.
Yes, she is. She is she's a monster of a different sort.
Yeah, something I think we all have deep respect for. All right, Lamar, you're up next.
Sure. I'm just going to read a short excerpt from the day everything starts to go wrong in the vacation resort known as Karloff Country. Somewhere above, more jet noise as yet another plane passed. I wanted to be outside, wanted to confirm that I wasn't imagining all this strangeness. When I tried to exit, I couldn't. The door was locked. Sandrina, unlocked door. Instead of the pleasant confirmation chime, the pyramid on the coffee table flashed red and gave an angry buzz, like when someone guesses wrong on a quiz show. I spoke louder. Sandrina, unlock the front door. Another red flash, another buzz. Dad nudged me aside and jiggled the knob. There was no give. Sandrina, this is Philip Butler, pin 9301. Unlock all doors in Butler home. No change. Mom crossed into the kitchen going for the back door. Sandrina, open the door right now. In the living room, I spun in a slow circle, telling myself there was no way we were trapped in our own house. That's just dumb. Dad kept messing with the lock and went from giving Sandrina commands to yelling them. At the window nearest the door, I pulled the drapes aside and peered across the street to Zeke's house. I spotted him through the window by his front door, his mouth stretched in a silent yell, both fists pounding the glass. Then the smart panes in every window in my house snapped from transparent to opaque, hurling us into sudden and complete darkness.
Yeah, I think the mix of technology and horror there is just so well done. Stuck in isolation, not knowing what's going on outside. It's great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Catriona?
Hi. Okay. I think I'll just read a little bit from the beginning of Little Eve. I love doing this because I haven't read from this book for so long. It's lovely. It's a wonderful kind of experience. No, we think, you know, I wrote the beginning at the beginning of the book. Why start anywhere else? Diner, 1921. My heart is a dark passage lined with ranks of gleaming jars. In each one, something floats, the past preserved as if in spirit. Here is the scent of grass and the sea. Here, the creak of wheels on a rough path. Here, a bright yellow gull's beak. The sensation of blood drying on my cheek in the wind. Abel crying for his mother. Uncle's hand on me. Silver on a white collarbone. The knowledge of loss, which comes like a blow to the heart or the stomach. It does not reach your mind until later. She is there too, of course, Evelyn. Somewhere along the rows, behind glass, she floats in the dim air. I do not seek her out. My survival depends on that. After everything and against all odds, I have been given a chance. A life, never mind what kind. I have people who depend on me, and I on them. Never mind who they are. I am filled with memory. I must make room in this dark passage. So I cast it forth this day. I give it to you. This is the day I became what I am. I'll stop there.
So good. Thank you. Alison, are you ready?
I was muted for my large sigh, so that's probably good. As a professional who is often expected to do this, I never hate it any less, but if you will all bear with me. She wakes without knowing why. The room is dark. Her phone says it's approaching 3 a.m. She sits up slowly, trying to figure out why her heart is thudding in her chest. She hears a soft thump and a rustling sound from out in the hall. One of the boys, she thinks, up to get a drink or something. The explanation isn't enough to still her thoughts. She swings her legs out of the bed, creeps across the room, and pokes her head into the hallway. She looks down toward the other dorms, then back toward the common area. The safety lights along the floor cast a shadow like a waveform, rippling away in either direction. She steps out of the room. It's cold, she realizes. Really cold, outside cold. She hopes the power hasn't gone out again. She doesn't know if she can do the generator on her own. She doesn't know if she can even go into the outbuilding alone, if she's being honest. She walks toward the common room, wishing she had more than one pair of socks on, pulling her fingers into her sleeves and tucking her hands into her armpits. Luke, she whispers into the dimness. No one answers. She walks into the kitchen, does a slow circle as she takes in the room, and stops. The back door is unlocked. Not open, not ajar, but the deadbolt is pulled all the way back and there's the faint shine of snow through the crack where the seal hasn't met. She moves slowly toward it, puts her fingertips on it and pushes. The tongue clicks as it settles into its groove. The rubberized edging on the door meets the wall. She pulls the deadbolt across into its home. She stands there for a moment, fingers resting on the cold metal. She turns back into the kitchen, thinking maybe about a cup of cocoa, and freezes with one foot in the air when her gaze catches on something through the window. Greta is standing in the snow in her thermal underwear, breath steaming away from her uncovered face. Riley squints as she walks closer. Greta looks wrong somehow, the bones of her face crowding behind her lips, almost protruding like a muzzle. She bends her knees slightly, then bends them back the other way and falls onto all fours. Riley claps her hands over her mouth. She drops to the floor behind the couch and scrambles to look around it, not wanting to take her eyes off Greta. When she pokes her head out, she doesn't see her at first. She's still down in that animal crouch. Her sleeping clothes are pale blue and she blends into the landscape. She shakes her head vigorously, strands of drool flying from her mouth, and pushes herself back to her feet unsteadily. She straightens to her full height, clothes sparkling with ice, and looks around. Her head turns just enough that Riley can see that too long jaw, watch her mouth drop open to reveal too many teeth. She presses her hands to her face and rubs at it like she's cold. Her fingers push and knead, scraping across her skin, and through it all, her mouth opens and closes. Her breath clouds away from her in little puffs, and Riley thinks she might be talking.
Just so good. You did amazing.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Lamar has to go. He has to take care of his kid. So thank you so much for coming, Lamar.
Thank you for having me, everyone. It's wonderful.
Bye, Lamar. You're a
Bye.
legend.
Okie doke. Tori, you're next.
Hello. Okay, so I'm gonna do a little bit just in the middle. It is a short story, so it's only like not very many pages. But so this is halfway through the home intrusion when she's thinking about the ghost. Save me, I think. What else is there to do? Who else is there to call on? After she was murdered, her body was shoved under the floorboards of her house. Her family came back to find no trace of her. I wonder if there was blood or if there was just nothing, but again, historical records are sparse in those details. They didn't know what had happened to her until days later when the smell started. They pulled up the floorboards to find her body there, mottled flesh in the summer heat. They never found her head. When they buried Barbara, I imagine they thought they were setting it all to rest. This woman, her life cut short for no reason, her pain, her suffering. But she lingered. She's here in this house, in these woods. And I whisper her name over and over and over again, a prayer as if that will save me when nothing else can. They blindfold us and lead us away from the house and into the woods. Tie us up, both of us on either side of Lee's sagging body, a tree at our backs. Lee is not breathing. I know this as a fact, but I'm unable to connect the fact with the reality of what that means. It's cold. My eyelashes are frozen together with tears that won't fall, soaking the blindfolds. The bigger one of the two pulls our blindfolds down to gag us. Neither of us even tried to scream when they dragged us from the house. It's useless. The wind is howling through the trees, and anyone who heard us would assume it's another frozen gust. There is no running from this. And Lee is, no, I cannot admit it, cannot even think the words, even as his body grows colder and colder against mine, unable to retain heat in the winter chill. We have no phones, no weapons, no escape plans. Jace is bleeding from his forehead. One of them knocked him on the head when he tried to scramble as we were dragged out of the basement, and I can't even feel my fingers or toes anymore. My mouth is full of blood from biting my tongue when I fell. All I can do is swallow it down.
Just the sense of helplessness is just so chilling. Thank you so much. I think we're gonna wrap up now because it's just after 6. Thank you so much, authors, for coming. Thank you, audience. I think we had a great time.
We did. Thank you so much, Fred, for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting.
Yes.
And I hope everyone has a happy, safe Halloween. If you're into that. If not, whoops.
Have a dangerous one.
Yeah.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank
Nice to see everyone.
See everyone too. Thanks.